always groove into that little countdown music. Hello, everybody. This is the Step Zen stream. We have a very special guest, Ben Holmes. This is not your actual
Hello.
name. It is Ben
Oh,
Holmes.
yes.
So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our guest, to our audience.
Yes, Ben Holmes is my nighttime personality. Normally I go by Ben Holmes. I am a full stack developer doing a whole bunch of web dev stuff over at Peloton right now. And I'm the maintainer of this little open source foray called Slinkity, which I'm sure we'll get into today.
Ooh, foray, that's a good word. So
like
yeah,
foray.
Slinkity is a very cool, hip, new open source project. And it's something that I've been helping out a little bit with as you've been getting it going. And just yesterday, actually, we had an FS Jam episode air about it, which is especially exciting because we're going to be building what I would consider to be an FS Jam project with Slinkity today, but we can kind of get into all that as we go. So we should first set the stage for any viewers who may not be familiar with 11D. Slinkity is a framework that is heavily built on 11D. Love the spooky names. Yeah, we got AJC Spider Web Dev and Ben Goulms here with you, giving you some spooky web dev content today. So let's talk a little about 11D. What is 11D and why did you decide to build upon it instead of kind of doing your own thing entirely?
Exactly. And I was doing my own thing for a little bit just because I didn't know what 11D was. And I thought, oh, if you want to go into this world of like, I want to compile my favorite framework into a static site, you got to build from scratch, which is the approach that Astro took as well. It's something that we take a lot of inspiration from. So I definitely call it out. But 11D is honestly two things. The first thing that's really good at is it's a static site generator, first and foremost. And it's a very unopinionated one at that is able to connect to any source of data through like a CMS connection or something through JavaScript. So if you've used something like Jekyll or Hugo, it's a very similar tool to that, except now you're using JavaScript and JavaScript plugins. So if you're an existing web developer, you probably feel more confident writing your own plugins for this sort of tool. So yeah, it's able to pull in data into a whole cascade of like a global data file that all of your pages can access, or pages that only one route can access, or a whole directory of routes, all sorts of things to aggregate information, which is like sort of the core part of Jamstack at the build time layer. And then 11D has a setup to compile any templating language you want. So if you want to use Vue to write a page, or you want to use Markdown, Nunjux, Liquid, all of the standard server-side templates that we've been using for decades, it'll help you compile that to a standard page as well. And the one piece that's missing from that, of course, is it has no opinions, first off, on styling. So if you want to compile Sass or Tailwind or any custom setup, you got to do that yourself. There are a number of plugins for it, but it's not included out of the box. And also compiling JavaScript. It has no opinions on that. It's only going to compile HTML templates to some more HTML. It's not going to bundle anything for you. It's not going to have live reloading, or certainly not hot module reloading, which is a popular term. So this project, Slinkity, is trying to bolt an existing bundler called Vite into your 11D flow. So you can keep doing what you're doing with 11D already, bring your templates, bring your styles, whatever setup that you like using because it's so flexible. And then just compiling any bit of JavaScript or CSS as well using the Vite bundler. So that's the setup.
Cool. We don't need to go super deep into it, but Vite is kind of a newer generation version of what we would traditionally think of a tool like Webpack or even Rollup. It actually uses Rollup, but it's a way to compile or transpile things like JSX and Vue and different Svelte templates, and basically take that, turn into HTML and vanilla JavaScript, and then you will have like a bundle that you can actually ship to the browser, because we're going to be writing lots of code that the browser doesn't necessarily understand because it's in all these different syntaxes and languages that are kind of bespoke to specific frameworks. But Vite is really cool because it lets you deal with all of those frameworks collectively in a way that lets you kind of pick and choose which ones you want to use, where you want to use them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's unique in that it's doing it from like the browser level, where it's like when I visit a route, I want to bundle the resources for that route when I'm looking at it. Where Webpack was like, I want to bundle my whole site, and then I'm going to look at it in my browser, which means like if you have a ton of pages on your site, you're going to be waiting forever while you're trying to work on development. But Vite's like, no, we're going to wait for you to visit that page. We'll use the HTML file as the entry point to decide what you want to see, and then we'll show it to you with whatever compilers we have out of the box or whatever plugins you configure for, like, here's how React works, here's how CSS modules works, here's how Tailwind works, any dependency that you want. So it's a new way of thinking about bundling.
Yeah, and as Lucia is saying in the chat, it is very, very fast as well, which is quite nice.
As the French say, yes. Vite is French for fast.
As the French say, hurry up. Ho, ho, ho.
Hurry up. Yeah. Yeah, it's not pronounced Vite, by the way.
And then the last thing that we should kind of mention is there's this term islands architecture, which was a term that was pioneered by Jason Miller, who's the creator of Preact and WMR, which is another kind of new generation build tool. And this is the idea of only using specific pieces of JavaScript where you need them on the page or on your website. And so if you can section it out into little islands of interactivity, I actually think that this is the original term for this, I think, was JavaScript sprinkles. This is what the people back in the Ruby and on Rails days used to say. You would want to have just little sprinkles of JavaScript that you put everywhere. And so an island of JavaScript is much like a sprinkle of JavaScript. You just want a little bit of JavaScript. You don't want too much JavaScript because you can kind of get overboard with it. And you had a really great metaphor, a food metaphor, to talk about this. You have like your salads, which is your very light, healthy HTML, and then your huge, beefy JavaScript burgers. And so you just want to have a little bit of burger.
You just want like a little chopped chicken on top of your salad. You don't want to eat a burger every day. I totally agree. That's the Jamstack Conf reference, by the way, for those unaware. But yeah, it's a cool setup. And I feel like sprinkles kind of scares people away as like, well, I don't have a sprinkle. Like my component's pretty big. I don't know. And it's like, you can put however much you want. It's just, it should be up to you to like opt into how much JavaScript you want on the page, instead of like, we're going to ship the whole hog single page app. And then you got to opt out with like clever server components and use memo. And I don't know, those are the terms to opt out, I think. Yeah. This is a way to opt in and choose how much JavaScript you need and then apply it.
Is. And so we're going to start building out this project here. I'm going to start totally from scratch here with just a blank empty directory. And we're going to set up our Slinkity project and show what goes along with it. I'm just going to kind of create a couple boilerplate pieces here, which is going to be a get ignore for all of our node modules, our config, which is going to have our keys, and then our 11D site itself, which is going to be kind of built on the fly. We're also going to have a StepZen endpoint that we're going to use to deploy our actual endpoint. We're going to have a config.yaml for our keys. And as we get into these, we'll talk about them a little bit more. If you're not familiar at all with StepZen or Slinkity, there might be some things that are a little bit confusing here. So we'll try our best not to run through everything too fast. But the first thing we're going to do is just build up a Slinkity project. So let's not talk about any of the StepZen stuff yet and just kind of talk about what is like a basic Slinkity project. And it's much like an 11D project. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the same out of the box. If you use like one of the 11D starter templates, even, you could use that as a base and start using Slinkity on top of it. So that's all we've done here.
You have to be aware of is that we're using the 11D 1.0 beta. And so what exactly does that mean?
It means it's got shiny features that may or may not break. They shouldn't. It's been very stable from my experience, but it enables some cool things like we allow you to write entire pages using .jsx. So if you wanted to like ship the whole hog and use React for your whole experience, you can do that. And that's using 11D's custom extensions helper that lets us define JSX. And that's a beta feature. So that's the main reason that we use it, is to reach for that. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as I've been building stuff out with these tools, I have found that the 11D beta hasn't gotten in my way at all. And I think it's because 11D itself is actually very stable, despite not being quote unquote 1.0 yet. I think that Zach, the creator, is someone who is a very cautious person in terms of when he says this is going to be
release. I know.
Yeah, in 1.0 and production ready. So this is actually further along. You would kind of think based on like the beta tag, and to the point where you could build a whole framework on top of it. And we should talk a little bit about what is this 11d.js file. This is our 11d config. So what's happening here?
Yeah, this is the config that 11d specifically is going to look at, but we're also able to pick up on. So you can sort of think of Slinkity, if you want to visual, as like the glue between 11d and the Vite bundler. So right now we're configuring just the 11d side over here, which is the base of our project and where all our data comes in. And all we've done in this file is we've configured like, where's our source directory? 11d doesn't even have an opinion on where your source directory is. You have to tell it. So here we've said source is going to be where our website lives. That's where our routes are. And Slinkity is smart enough to look over there and say, okay, 11d wants source. We'll use source too. So cool. That's what we're doing.
And then we're also going to just create a couple scripts here as well. So we have Slinkity -- serve, and then just Slinkity for the build. So this is going to, the serve one will start our Vite server, and then the build command will build our project into our _site folder. And if we wanted to deploy this to Netlify, that would be what we would do. We would use the build command, and the start command will actually use in development. And we're not going to deploy this to production because we're going to end up in a place where there's going to be a couple things we'll still have to kind of deal with in terms of like environment variables and things at like a higher level. But this is going to be showing kind of how do you just get the baseline thing connected to a database. And let's just kind of spin this up here right now. All we have going on is a simple index.md. So this is our Markdown index file that is going to be the entry point into our application. And we're going to run yarn start because we created that start command in our package.json. And this will kick open our server on localhost 8910. And there we go. So we just got our project going. Not much going on right now. We just have an H1 that says stepsn.slinkity. So that's pretty nice. But this is where the interesting stuff comes in. Now we're going to actually get some JSX going. So we're going to have a JSX file with a basic little React component. It's a hello component that's just returning a span. And the way we render that into our index page is going to be with this shortcode. So what is a shortcode?
Yeah, a shortcode is just a function really, but it's a function that takes in a set of arguments, in this case, the name of our component, hello, and then it'll spit out some HTML for our page. And what's interesting is it's going to spit out HTML that renders a script tag, and that script tag is going to hydrate in our React component. So it's kind of a funky way to get JavaScript running on any templating language like Markdown, which we should see in a moment.
Yeah, so I want to just get these both on the screen.
I see.
So once I save this, then we will get an error. Oh no, what happened?
Oh, well, you're committing heresy and putting your hello in a strange component.
Right, because I skipped a step here. I was going to, I had figured out how to do this without the includes folder, but we decided that was actually a bad practice. We should not tell people to do that. So let's put this in an includes folder. So what is the include folder?
Yes, so includes you can think of as like a junk drawer for everything that should not be a route on your site. If you've used like a generic components folder in like Next or something, like this is the components folder, and then pages is everything outside of includes. So here, because we don't want hello to be a route, we want it to be something we include somewhere else. We'll put it inside of includes. And right now we have a requirement to nest that inside of a components folder, but we're going to be dropping that very soon. So that's all we've done here is now we have it in components.
Yep, so I fixed that up. This is now in our includes folder and components folder, and then we modified our little shortcode here to tell it that our hello component is inside of this components folder.
Yep, cool. That's it.
And hello to Alex Strost, Front End Horse, just popped in. A funny story, actually. Me and Ben met through the Front End Horse Discord and the React Podcast Discord. So Alex Strost deserves a little bit of credit for us getting this stream happening.
I actually have my spookity whiteboard from just a moment ago. I guess we'll keep it there. It's time to get spooky. Yeah, that's our name for the next couple days. And then we got to make it fall themed or something. I don't know. We need a Christmas name. We'll come up with one.
Yeah. All right. So let's get some steps and stuff going now. So I am really excited for this because what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be taking Slinkity, which is traditionally a Jamstack kind of framework. And, most people who know what the Jamstack is, they think of it as like a front end technology where you have a front end that is able to statically generate HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then put that on a CDN and then load it up. But there's this new thing called Full Stack Jamstack. I'm the host of the Full Stack Jamstack podcast. This is something that I'm very into. And it involves taking these Jamstack frameworks and giving them backend power and capability. And the way we're going to be doing that is with StepZen. This is the StepZen stream. If you know what StepZen is, not quite sure how you found this, but happy to have you. We are going to be using a GraphQL API to serve up data through a GraphQL endpoint. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create this index.graphql file, which is going to point to our other files. And before we are doing anything complicated with databases or any of that, we just want to get a simple little test going on here. So this is just a basically test object that StepZen will generate mock JSON for us with this get test query. And the way we're going to start up our server is with this StepZen start command. And then this is going to kick off a let's see, because it's already in the StepZen folder. That. And then we can run a little sample. Wait, where was my gist? I had a gist. This was the gist. Okay. And then we can.
When you get full stack, the browser tabs go flying.
I know, right? I always end up with a million of these. So we're going to run a GraphQL query, and it's going to do our get test query, and it's going to return a string. So this is just a little mock JSON string right here. And we are on localhost 5000. It's close enough.
I don't close enough. It's European language.
Yeah. And so this is not actually running on localhost though, the endpoint itself. This is just our graphical editor. If we see over here, we actually have a full deployed endpoint on pleasanton.stepzen.net. Now, if you create a StepZen account, if you go to stepzen.com, you can follow along with what we're doing here. You will get a deployed endpoint with a key that allows you to access it. So now that we have that set up, we're going to actually get this connected to our front end. And the way we're going to do that is by setting just a couple environment variables and then running a query through fetch. So let me just grab this whole chunk of code here, and then we'll kind of talk about what's going on in it. So we have a basic fetch request that's running through a use effect. So if you've ever done a fetch request to do a GraphQL query, it's actually pretty simple. All you have to do is just tell it that you're doing a post request in the method, set the headers, which is going to be content type application /JSON, set any headers that you need to set, and then send the query through the body by doing a JSON.stringify and then sending the query. And then this is the actual query right now. We're sending a get test query and returning the string. Then we do a .then to resolve the promise. Yeah, Trost, we need to get a front end horse StepZen stream going. That'll be really fun.
So I guess just to break down what you just did, is it a dev server that's looking at GraphQL files and then just generating endpoints from it, or generating queries from it?
Exactly. It generates the endpoints, not the queries.
Okay.
You create the schema. And so the schema has your types and it has your queries. And it can also have your mutations if you're going to be writing as well.
Yeah.
And so this is right now, we're just going to do some basic queries to read from the mock JSON right now. But later we're going to then hook it up to a Supabase database to get access to dynamic data that we can generate, and we can read and write and do whatever we want to. But I have hopped off of sharing right now because now I need to put in my key. And this part's always a little bit tricky because you don't want to show your key on a stream, of course. And if you do that, then you end up looking quite silly. Let me tell you, I've done it before.
Yeah. And I know we were talking earlier about environment variables on the front end. I don't know if you find anything there or if we're just not going to show that component anymore.
Yeah, so that's going to be a thing that what I did is I basically added like 10 lines of white space and put the environment variables all the way at the bottom of the component. Perfect. Because it still reads it as if it's at the top. So that's great. Yeah, this is the joys of live streaming. Sometimes you gotta do some silly stuff to actually get it to work. But this is now good to go. So let me now start sharing again. Let me make sure I don't have anything sensitive showing. This is looking all good. So let's go. This, that, this, and that. So many windows. Oh my God. Okay. Share screen. Boom, boom, boom. Sweet. Okay. Here we go. This is our whole component. And here it is running. Now we see that it is performing the GraphQL query. It is getting that same test string that we did before, and it is displaying it on the page. And this is possible because of the magic of React and the magic of Slinkity to run that React. So we have a use effect, we have a use state, we run the use effect hook and pass in the fetch state, and then we use our use state to create a little hello variable and a set hello variable. You set hello with the response.data.getTest.string. And so this is pretty much your like React data fetching 101 right now. And so there's a ton of stuff we're missing here. And this is just like, this is a proof of concept. This is just kind of showing the basic case of how do you do this. There's no loading. When I refresh, you see it's just blank up until we get the thing. So you'd want a loading state. You'd want an error state. You had like a redwood cell. That would be a very useful thing to have. But of course, we don't quite have cells yet in Slinkity, maybe one day. But this is the very, very simplest way to simply run a fetch request, throw a GraphQL query over the wire, and then get a response back, stick it in your state, and then render it on your page. So that's pretty cool. Like it's very simple. It doesn't look super exciting, but having worked with a lot of pieces of tech like this, getting this to work is quite a lot of work. And getting it all put together with a nice framework, it's really impressive.
Nice, yeah. And I'm sure you could expand this to like use React Query or something, like abstract away the use effect and just do a little magic there. I haven't used it much. I just know it's a nice like GraphQL pairing.
Yeah, React Query would be a good thing to do. There's kind of two different things you can look at here, which is that if you're using React Query, there would still be the question of how you actually make the query. So you could use React Query with a fetch call, or you could use React Query with GraphQL request. So if we brought in the GraphQL request library, that would abstract away a little bit of this fetch call, and that you wouldn't have to like set the body and then JSON.stringify it and all that. It
that's the piece for sure.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different libraries we could bring in to kind of simplify this and make it a little nicer. But for the sake of this stream, I thought it would be good to really just show like all you gotta do is a fetch request if you want to get this to work. And I think that is pretty cool.
Yeah. And I will at least call out, I'm sure we don't have time to demo it, but if you wanted to do this fetch at build time, totally possible with 11D. If you like make your own little 11D data file and make the request server side, you could throw that into your React component so that it immediately shows a result and you don't even need a loading spinner. It could mean it's out of date because it's a build time process. 11D serverless is coming. That will help with that. But you can do it at any level of the full stack. I guess is like the takeaway.
Yeah, 11D serverless is going to be a crucial piece of this if we want to kind of complete this, because that's then where you would be able to hide your API key, because I just did that whole song and dance hiding the API key. But the problem is right now our API key is in our front end. It's in our hello.jsx file. So if we were to open up our source maps and look at this outputted bundle, you would see the key right in there. So we can't deploy this. We can't actually send this to production right now. So that's kind of like the next thing to figure out after we get this project actually working. But that's something that we're going to be figuring out as we get deeper into these Slinkity full stack projects. We'll have, docs and conventions for dealing with environment variables and all that kind of stuff. But you all are getting a peek into the future right now.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to serverless, like it's mostly 11D doing the work too, where it's like, all we need to do is make sure that Vite is able to go to your serverless functions and process things correctly. It's easier than you might think. So I'd definitely like to get there. But right now, if you use plain 11D, you can just deploy a route on a serverless function by adding a little serverless front matter attribute. And that will throw it in a folder. You can use Netlify, DPR, and all that fanciness, or just AWS. That's what they support right now. And with that, you can get like a nice full stack experience where every page refresh will fetch the new query. We just need that to work with React. That's the next big thing.
Indeed. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to spin up a Supabase project. So have you ever used Supabase, Ben?
The Jamstack conf talk was hilarious, but no, I haven't used it myself.
It was, yeah, the Jamstack conf talk was very, very good. So for people who weren't there, there was a really great talk. So Supabase is a database company, and this is the one, John Myers. Yeah, so he did a lightning launch for Supabase functions, which are a way to run stored procedures in your Postgres database. And he had like all sorts of great memes and jokes in there. But for anyone who hasn't used it before, it's really great because it's literally just a Postgres database that is entirely yours to do whatever you want with. So they spin up the database for you. They give you lots of nice conventions in terms of how to connect to it. They give you an API key. They give you an endpoint, and they actually give you fully RESTful APIs to hook in to that database. And so that's going to be a little bit what we'll be showing here, is that we're going to take their Postgres endpoints. So Postgres with a T is a way to expose endpoints. Yeah, no, it's one of those things that's like Postgres.
Interesting.
No, Postgres.
Yeah, when you said it's something called Postgres, I was like, yeah, I've heard of that. No, it's this.
I am aware of Postgres. Yes. Yeah, no, Postgres. And this is really great for StepZen because StepZen has a way to feed in a RESTful endpoint into your GraphQL schema. And we actually had Paul on not too long ago to show kind of what we're doing here. You see, I got my nice little StepZen blazer on there as well. And this is a longer stream showing what we're doing here. We had to do kind of a condensed version just to get this up and going with Slinky. But if you're curious about the Supabase part and want to learn a little bit more about that, I would recommend checking this out and drop that here for you all. And takes a little bit of time to get spun up, but now we're pretty much good to go. I'm also going to tear this down eventually. So I'm exposing my keys, but that's not really an issue because it's just a simple little test database here. So this is our stepzen config.yaml file, and this is where we set our API key. And so this is going to then handle that for us. And then our config.yaml is in our git ignore, so it doesn't actually get deployed. And then we're going to have this thing right here. So this is going to be our actual query that we're going to take our endpoint. And the way we do that is we grab this URL here, which is the supabase.co, and then feed that in. And we see how it has /books. That's because we're going to actually create a books table. And like most really nice modern database tools these days, they give you a really cool UI to just create some tables really quickly. So we're going to create books, and then we're going to add a column for name, and then that is going to be a text type. Save that. And then we're also going to insert some rows. So this one will just be test, and then test 2, and then spooky test.
Oh my god.
Gotta have the spookiness.
It's terrifying.
I know, I'm so scared. Okay. And if we wanted to, I have some like curl commands here that you could run to figure out whether it works or not, but we're going to skip right past that and just get right into the steps and parks. I think our endpoint should be all set up correctly right now. So now we just need to run stepzen start, and then this is going to do everything for us. So it'll take that key and slot it in with this headers thing here, and that's going through the Supabase config. So now if we just want to run this query now, we should be able to get back our data that we wrote in our test 2, and our spooky test. So,
very simple. Yeah.
Any questions about that? What just happened?
Well, I mean, you made a database. It generates a local host for you, and then you can query it. That's awesome. So it's interesting that I can just wire up Postgres to a query. Like, I don't know, how custom can you get with like query resolvers and all of that?
So yeah, that's the thing with stepzen, is that you are not writing resolvers at all, and we actually give you a couple like kind of super powerful directives to even do things like, say I have 2 queries that I want to run, and one query needs to receive the output of another query for its arguments. I can chain queries together and feed one into the other. Or if I wanted to create like a relationship between 2, because I wanted to have a foreign key that attaches to another query, you can do that as well with Materializer. So with different stepzen directives, we give you conventions for wiring all this up in almost any way you can think about. And so it's a very, very powerful system, super cool. And I highly recommend everyone who is interested in this kind of stuff to check it out. I am going to, again, hop off stream so that I can put some keys in. Nice. And this is where the magic happens. So this is why I was saying that this is a good example of what I call full stack Jamstack, because we haven't really deviated from like the Jamstack part of this. We still have a kind of static front end that is decoupled from our back end, which is really nice. But we also now have a database, like an entire database that we own. We have our own data. We don't need to use some kind of third-party CMS. But at the same time, if we want to use a third-party CMS, we do that as well, because we can just hook into any endpoint you can think of. So I did another stream recently with the Storyblock people, and they have a GraphQL endpoint. And so right now we're feeding in a REST endpoint, but if you want to feed in a GraphQL endpoint, you could also do that. And then you're pretty much good to go there as well. So you have a ton of flexibility here in terms of what you're doing and how you get it all to work.
Yeah. So I think you'd mentioned before that like Supabase is very resty and stepzen loves being GraphQL-y. Like, is there any thought of Supabase using other protocols other than Postgres, or is that kind of like their North Star at the moment?
Yeah, I think at this point they're not really planning on doing anything that is not like that is they're probably just going to be exposing that current thing, and instead of doing the whole like how do you figure out how to get like post graph file involved, I don't think they're going to go that far with it. So this is why stepzen is pretty nice. It gives you everything you need to get set up with a GraphQL endpoint, and then not really have to like worry about how to do that translation. But I don't know, you'd have to probably ask call that. So I'm almost there. Let me get this up and that up. Okay, and then just make sure don't got any keys anywhere. Boom, boom, boom. All right, cool.
There it is.
So now we have here on our front end, we are seeing the same response that we got earlier from our StepZen query. And then we're actually taking those results and putting them on the page. So now we have a Slinkity project that is connected to a Postgres database via Supabase that is making a GraphQL query through StepZen to then translate that into a REST query that then gives you back the data. And so this is our whole full stack Jamstack Slinkity project.
There it is. Yeah.
There it is.
This must be the 30th way to bring backend data to the front end with Jamstack, but I think it's a cool number, 30. I don't know. Another horse in the race.
Well, the thing I like about it is that I find that with most Jamstack technologies, they push you towards like third-party CMSs and kind of like more built-out data solutions, which is great for lots and lots of reasons. And if you're working with a team that has content editors who aren't necessarily technical, that's really important.
That's what it's really for.
If you're just like a developer who wants to build like a full stack application and what's up, Chan? And you just want to be able to say, hey, I want to have like a Postgres database because Postgres is what I know how to use. Then it's really great because you can then have this whole full stack project with a database you know really well. And if we wanted to do this with a different Postgres database, we could also do that. Although then we would have to kind of figure out the translation of the REST endpoint. So it's also worth pointing out that if we, sorry about that noise, I'm in the noisy city of Oakland. So if we check out in our docs here, we actually have some docs showing how to connect to Supabase without using their REST connector. So there's another thing we have called @dbquery. And with @dbquery, you literally just
that's so funky.
Write an actual query. So like if you want to just say select star from books where dollars is, or where, you know, the date is greater than this, you can do that as well. So there's going to be a lot of different ways to kind of do this. I find that doing the REST endpoint through the REST connector is a little bit more comprehensible to people than doing the whole @db query, because it's a little more of like a specialized StepZen thing. But there's going to be lots and lots of different ways to do it. I did another stream actually with the Railway team, or not Supabase, Railway StepZen. And with this one, what we did is we took Postgres database, ran it through PostGraphql, and then PostGraphql creates a GraphQL endpoint that then you can feed into StepZen's @GraphQL directive. So it's like, it's almost comical, like the amount of ways you can figure out how to attach to a Postgres database with StepZen. There's you can do it through @dbquery, you can do it through @REST, or you can do it through @GraphQL. So whatever kind of floats your boat, whatever suits your fancy is the way you could figure out how to do it. But the point being that there's a ton of flexibility here, and we really want to give the developers options in how they're going to connect to their database. But there's just going to be something for everyone, I think, in terms of your mental model, where you're coming from. Do you already know GraphQL? Do you already know how to work with REST endpoints? Do you already know how to write SQL queries really well? You know, most people are going to be coming from a certain perspective in terms of what they know and what they're comfortable with. So I really like the fact that we give developers all of these options to do things however it is that they are going to want to do it.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, the closest analogy that comes to mind is like, it's kind of like how Gatsby exposes all of your data via GraphQL, and you can decide how information gets into that GraphQL funnel. But StepZen's like, we're actually going to make some like full stack endpoints that you can hit. But it's a similar philosophy of bring your own not even back end, just the back of the back end, the database and how to connect to said database. And you can do anything you want from there, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and what you said there,
I haven't seen it before to stream, so looking for similarities.
This is just usual thing when I bring people onto the stream. I'm like, you'll explain your part, I'll explain the steps end part, and then we'll do the project, and they'll be like, wow, I have no idea how that works, but it works. That's pretty cool.
You can do that.
And you mentioned back of the back end, and so this is a popular phrasing that I'm hearing more and more. You have the front of the front end, which is like HTML, CSS, and then you have the back of the front end, which is like data fetching and Redux and how you actually do the data management. And then you have like the front of the back end, which I would say is like Steps End. Steps End is like the front of the back end because it's a gateway into your back end architecture. And then the back of the back end is the actual database itself. Like, what is the database? Where is the database? And so we have this whole connection of front of the front end, back of the front end, front of the back end, back of the back end. And it gives you a way to kind of separate the full stack into these different layers. And for me, this has like been very, very useful as someone who was trained in like a quote unquote full stack boot camp. We kind of went through a sequence like this, but it was never really made explicit. Like we were never really told when we were at the front or the back of the front end, when we were crossing that barrier. You just kind of, you go through it, and then you're just like, hopefully they'll get it by the time they hit the end of it. And it's just like halfway through, you're just like, nothing makes sense. And then by the time you get to the back of the back end, you're like, why didn't they start at the back of the back end? That would have made so much more sense, at least for me, you know?
Yeah, people go both ways. I'm definitely more of like, I'll go from designs to front end to understand what the heck the data should be, and then model out how I want my front end to receive that, and then deal with the database later. That's my bias towards the front end for sure, where I don't want to touch databases. But I feel like it kind of goes both ways. It's almost why GraphQL exists, is like front end was frustrated with having so many different needs depending on the view. And they wanted a language that's like, back end, figure out what I want. Here's a way that I can tell you exactly the shape of the thing I want. And then we can have this front of the back end, back of the back end split to sort of take that database stuff and massage it into what the front end wants. So I could see it going both ways, but yeah, GraphQL is really opening that door of making front end easier.
Yeah. And then you had mentioned Gatsby. So do you have much experience working with Gatsby?
It's just the weird fish that came to mind of like, it's the only time I've seen GraphQL used to access, honestly, like it's not back of the front end data, because you do all your GraphQL queries at build time pretty much, but you're even using GraphQL to like access your images. And it's like, I'm used to just going to assets/image.jpg. Why am I writing a GraphQL query? And that's because you want this like layer in front that lets you communicate, here's what I actually need to ship to the end user. Don't ship all my data, please. And then reformatting it on the fly. Like, I want to turn this image into a beautifully formatted image in a picture element or whatever else. And that lets you do the transformations as well. So that it's like a loose experience with Gatsby of like, I used it for a personal site because I wanted image sharp. That's probably the reason everyone got into Gatsby, honestly, is like, that image plugin is cool. And then the rest of it you just kind of learn. Yeah, this is it's funny that like that's the feature. That's why I didn't.
Yeah, my co-host Chris, who does the Full Stack Jamstack podcast with me, he has said the Gatsby image component was like the specific reason he started using Gatsby. And for me, the GraphQL stuff is what always interested me about Gatsby. And what we built today is kind of like a really, really rudimentary version of what you could do with something like Gatsby, because you get a GraphQL endpoint that can pull in data from almost anywhere, and you can feed that into your front end. So this is kind of why I was really excited to do this project, because like there's not a lot of other projects that do this, but I think that there's merit to it, and we need a kind of better, more modern way of doing this, because Gatsby is really great. And I used Gatsby a lot back in the day, but I don't really use it so much today, because I kind of feel like it's accumulated a bit of legacy in terms of how it's developed, and that the plugin ecosystem is kind of shaky. You never really know kind of what plugins you're getting. So I want to build out more greenfield examples of how to combine this GraphQL data fetching with a really nice front end static thing that also involves React and partial hydration and all that kind of stuff. So Slinky to me seems like a really great project to do that with. And then StepZen is a really great GraphQL tool to do that with. So this is like the very, very beginning of this integration. But I think this is something that's actually going to be very powerful once we get the environment variables and the serverless functions figured out. We're going to have actually a really cool full stack way to use Slinkity. So really glad you came onto the stream to do this with me. This is just the beginning, I think, of a lot of really cool, interesting work that we'll be doing over the next couple months.
I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, it's like starting from the bare basics and slowly walking up features of like, now I want shared state between the little islands of components on my page, or I want serverless functions now. So every page refresh fetches it fresh. And then I think the final step is going to be like this reckoning of single page apps versus multi-page apps. Everyone's talking about it. And it's going to be part of the Slinkity story. It's one of the initial features I worked on, actually, when I thought of Slinkity in the first place, of like, what if you could tie together pages as a single page app, but choose which pages are part of that single page app marriage, where it's like you can invent little single page apps like islands, but on your website level. And everyone's kind of moving towards that. I know Rich Harris like had that very like interesting talk on what transitional apps mean, of like, we don't want to commit to only multi-page or only single page. Like, we want to have the right amount of JavaScript at the right time, and everyone's going at it from a different angle. And whoever wins, I don't know. I think we'll end up with just a bunch of flavors and everyone chooses their favorite. That seems to be how these things always go. It's like, we have more flavors than ever. Like, no one has like chosen the perfect stack, where it's like Slinkity versus Astra, especially. It's like some people in the 11 community love using like view templates, nunjucks, and so on. And this approach works great for their existing stack. And then on the Astro side, it's like, I love using JSX already. This is the fit for me. I didn't want to use any 11e templates anyways. So it's like different flavors, but we're getting the same output for the end user. So who cares? Just like use what you enjoy, as long as it gives like the end user what they need.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that we are collaborating with the Astro team actually to start building out parts of Slinkity. So when people look at these kind of frameworks and they think of like framework competition or like framework war, that I find that's almost never the case. That when there's similar projects that are aiming for similar goals, there's actually not hostility and animosity here. There's actually a greater like need to collaborate, because it shows that almost no one else is working on this except us. So when you find someone else working on this, you're like, oh, cool. Like, let's exchange notes actually.
Yeah. I mean, it happens at the framework level too. Like, Svelte's inspired by React and Vue is inspired by Svelte for Vue 3. At least I think, looking at Vue 3, I'm like, this seems familiar to me. Like, everyone's looking at everyone else's homework in some way or another. And right now we're doing that to figure out, like, we only support React right now. Let's support everyone. And then Astro's like, we have this renderer plugin set up to support everyone. Could probably port it to your setup. And so it's like, we'll see how that goes, to just like support everyone in the very same way, because we're both Islands architecture projects that are very bare bones. So it's easy to just like use similar approaches.
Yep. So I'm going to drop a couple links here. We have your Twitter is bholmesdev. If anyone wants to follow you or see what you're doing. We've also got slinkity.dev for anyone who's curious about learning more about Slinkity. We've, of course, got stepzen.com if you want to learn more about StepZen. And then I am AJC Web Dev on the Twitters as well. So if you enjoyed this, if you want to learn more about this, feel free to contact either me or Ben. And then in the next coming weeks, we're going to have some example projects up on StepZen samples with Slinkity and Supabase, showing how to do this. So there'll be a repo as well if you want to kind of clone this code down yourself and start playing with it. So really excited to get some more of this material out there into the world, and would really love to talk to anyone who's interested in doing any of this. And with that, is there anything else you would like to say to our viewers before we close it out?
Nothing, no. Go check out our contributing guide as well. If you want to get involved in this sort of thing, we love having contributors. We're actually getting like more sort of like contributors and bug reports than ever, which is great. So yeah, see you over there. I guess.
Yeah, I will go ahead and pop that in there as well. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone who was watching this. Really appreciate it. And we will catch you next Friday, 12 p.m. Pacific time, like usual. Have a good day, everyone.
Nice.